Odds are, if you've ever applied for a job, you've probably heard the term work-life balance. It's a term that's always getting thrown around by companies and recruiters who are trying to promote the fact that you can have a good home life, spend time with your friends and family, in addition to also being able to contribute to your work in a meaningful way. And don't get me wrong, that all sounds great, but what does that actually mean? So this was a little bit confusing to me because it seems unintuitive. Companies are businesses, and at the end of the day, businesses want to make money. If their employees are doing less work, the companies are going to make less money, which seems to go completely against the whole point of business. But this overlooks a significant detail of how the relationship works, which is not only do employees need the business to make money and make ends meet, but the business is not able to make their product without having employees to do the work for them. Ultimately, any company is going to need a lot of employees to do any sort of work at scale. As a result, if you're not willing to treat your employees well, they're going to work for another company, in which case you can no longer make the products you want to make, and especially if you need specialized employees that are not easy to find, if you drive them away by treating them poorly, then your business is going to suffer because all of a sudden you have no employees anymore, which means you can't support any of your products. And obviously, if you don't have any products or services, then you probably aren't running a very successful business. If we look at the work-life balance equation using only these two crude variables, and yes, they are extremely crude, we're going to end up with two different extremes. On the one hand, we're paying our employees a ton of money to not do a lot of work, and that's not generally a good recipe for a successful business. On the other hand, we're not treating our employees well, we're not paying them enough money, and we're overworking them. They're probably going to be unhappy, they're not going to be putting in good work, they're going to leave to go to another company, and now you only have miserable employees, or even worse, no employees at your business. What this means is it's the job of the company to figure out where on that spectrum is the optimal place for work-life balance to be. Like we just established, either of those two extremes is probably a pretty terrible place for business to be, and they're not going to succeed. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily easy to quickly figure out what the best combination of giving perks is versus getting a certain amount of output out of employees. So now that we've established that companies are really just trying to turn the knobs to figure out what the optimal amount of work-life balance is, not too little, not too much, how do they actually do this? Depending on the company, there's a lot of different things I could talk about here, but there's a few obvious major ones. Probably the most obvious one is having time off, or if you're lucky, paid time off. And essentially what this is your company saying you're allowed to not work at a job every single day, and occasionally you can spend some time with your family or to do other things outside of work. Now, obviously, depending on where you're working, there's going to be different politics and policies involved. For example, you might start out with a certain amount of time off, and to reward loyalty to the company, you'll get more and more time over the years. Other places claim to give you unlimited paid time off, but like we talked about in the previous section, you're not really going to be able to have a successful business if all of your employees are getting paid to sit around not doing any work. Another thing that's really been driven forward by the pandemic is having more flexible working hours and having the freedom to do your work from wherever you want. As more and more companies try to bring their employees back to working in person, it's become painfully obvious that a lot of employees don't want to give up some of this flexibility that they've had during the pandemic, of being able to work from home when they want to, being able to stay with their kids and get tasks done while they're at home, and being forced to go back into the office and working strict hours just isn't cutting it anymore. Seeing the philosophies that different companies have adopted has been quite interesting. In some cases, you're seeing mass resignations from different industries as people realize they can find something better if they go elsewhere. In other cases, companies are realizing that if they don't want to lose all of their employees, they need to change their benefits to promote having a better work-life balance instead of just assuming things will go back to the way they were before the pandemic started. And of course, the culture at the company also plays a huge role in this. If you're working somewhere that has a cutthroat environment, you're doing stack rankings, you're always worried about losing your job, and you have tight deadlines all the time, you're probably not doing a lot of balancing, you're probably just doing a lot of working, stressing, and not being very happy at your job. Of course, if companies want to, there are definitely ways to mitigate this. The question is more so if they want to or not. By having stack rankings, yes, you'll probably get more work out of your employees because they're scared to lose their jobs. At the same time though, they're going to be significantly more stressed than they would be if you just evaluated them based on their own performance. Simultaneously, introducing things like morale events can make people more excited and energized about going to work instead of feeling like they're constantly just clocking in and clocking out of the same old boring job. And of course, there's a million other things I could talk about here, but the overall theme is pretty simple. Recognizing that your employees are people and not automatons, and that they have lives outside of work. Ultimately, by giving people more flexibility, they're going to be happier and more satisfied in their personal lives, and as a result, they're going to be more likely to do more meaningful work and stay with the company instead of leaving to find another job. Okay, so all of this talk is great. You'll hear lots of stuff from recruiters about how companies promote work-life balance, and there's all these great perks, but what does this actually look like? Especially during work from home, having work-life balance can be even more challenging by the fact that your home is now your office. There's no longer any sort of physical separation between where I'm hanging out, doing FaceTime calls and playing on my computer, and where I'm actually doing work for my job. The first thing I did, which I have to give my manager credit, he was the one who gave me this idea, is to set fairly rigid working hours for yourself. If you were going into an office, you would drive in at a certain time, you do your work, and you would drive out at a certain time. Every morning at about 7:45, I open up my computer, and then at around 4:30 or 5, I shut the computer, and for the most part, I don't get back on for the rest of the night. Obviously, from time to time, there's going to be exceptions to this rule. There's definitely days when I stay on longer than 4:30 or 5 because I'm in meetings with other people or I'm trying to get a little bit of more work done. But for the most part, by having hours when you're working and hours when you're not working, this gives you a lot more separation between work and life. The other thing that goes along with this is, as I've heard some people say, you aren't constantly on. And what that means is if you're doing small amounts of work throughout the day where you're working a little bit and then not working, in the evening hours, you're gonna keep just going on a little bit and off a little bit. And next thing you know, it doesn't seem like there's an hour that goes by when you're awake in which you're not doing a little bit of work or just checking your email, and you never really get a chance to completely step away from your work. The one thing that I talked about earlier that as a new hire I can't yet take advantage of is days off. Now, as a new hire, I was allocated 3 weeks of paid time off. However, since I just started the job, I haven't yet accrued those days off. What that means is as I work, I'm gonna be building up those days and then I'll be able to start taking them. But on day one, I started with 0 days off. Generally, when you're ramping up in a new job, you probably shouldn't be taking a lot of days off anyway. However, you don't quite have that flexibility of work-life balance when you're first getting started because you can't actually take days off yet until you've accrued them. One of the most important things you can do though, especially as a new hire, is constantly communicating about your status and getting a better feel from your manager and the people around you of the job that you're doing. Especially if you're new to a job and you're integrating with your team and getting a feel for how the company operates, having those conversations with your manager and your coworkers can be super valuable. For example, and this is something I've dealt with over the past month and a half, is figuring out if I'm doing enough work, if the work I'm doing is good enough quality, and what exactly is expected from me. It can be a little bit hard as a new hire looking at people who have a lot more experience, who can work a lot faster than you, and feeling like you're behind. But at the same time, and my manager has stressed this to me before, you don't want to burn yourself out, because in that case, you're not going to be happy, you won't have any semblance of work-life balance, and then you probably won't be a good contributor to the team, and you might end up leaving the company, which ultimately is not what they want. At least to some extent, companies want you to be happy and fulfilled so that you stay at that company and keep doing good work for them. As a result, if you don't take advantage of the things that they give you, like choosing not to take any vacation time because you think, I'm going to be as productive as I can and get as much work done as I can for the company, you're just essentially hurting yourself, but also hurting the business. Because if you burn yourself out and you become unhappy and you decide to leave, now you're no longer getting the opportunity of working at that company, you're not having a good work-life balance, and that company has now lost a valuable employee. Alright guys, if you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor and hit that thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. If you're new here, consider subscribing for new videos coming very soon. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.